Welcome to Kibbe on Liberty. Today we're going to hear the tragic story of Nikki Goeser, who saw her husband gunned down by a stalker in a gun-free zone. And we're going to talk to her about why it is that women in particular should be free to defend themselves with a gun. Check it out. Nikki, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So you are on a book tour right now, and you just got out of Fox News studio. Who you been talking to?
Ainsley Earhardt interviewed me on Fox and Friends, and I was also on Judge Andrew Napolitano's show, and I also did some filming with Tucker Carlson, and I'm excited about that. It hasn't aired yet because of all the impeachment news, so It keeps getting bumped back, but that's okay.
We're all impeachment all the time. So I met you through our mutual friend, Congressman Thomas Massie.
Yes, love him. He is fantastic.
If Thomas vouches for you, he's usually at least 60% right. So I'm guessing you're a good person.
I'm a pretty decent person.
Pretty decent person.
Yeah.
And I wanted to talk to you about your story. And you have a new book called "Stalked and Defenseless: How Gun Control Helped My Stalker Murder My Husband in Front of Me." And this obviously is a very personal story for you, but the reason that I'm so moved by it is I think we libertarians struggle sometimes to explain why it is that the Second Amendment is so important to us. And a lot of these sort of intellectual and philosophical arguments fall on deaf ears because most people think about guns and gun control in a strictly emotional way. They have an emotional reaction one way or the other, and maybe the caricatures of the far left that imagines a world where guns disappear like unicorns, and the uber conservative world where everyone's packing. Somewhere in the middle is the right approach to things. Mm-hmm. But if you would tell us your story. Tell us what happened to your husband.
My husband Ben was murdered right in front of me by a man who was stalking me. And this happened in a restaurant that was a gun-free zone. In Tennessee at the time, you were not allowed to bring a permitted gun. In other words, you've got your handgun carry permit. Doesn't matter. You can't bring a legal permitted gun into any restaurant if they also serve alcohol. So the restaurant that we were in served full meals, but they also served alcohol. So I obeyed that law, and I left my permitted firearm that I normally carried for self-defense locked in my vehicle that night. Of course, the man who was stalking me did not have a permit to carry. He brought in a gun illegally into the middle of a gun-free zone, and he proceeded to shoot my husband 7 times in front of myself and everyone in the middle of a busy restaurant. And I will probably wonder for the rest of my life if I could have prevented that. Of course, I'll never know because I was denied a chance. I was stalked and defenseless.
Yeah. And there was a Marine in the room that eventually tackled the guy and prevented him from killing anybody else.
Yeah, I tell you, the police, when they searched the murderer's truck at the crime scene that night, they found 2 more guns, ammunition, a baseball bat, binoculars, gloves, rope, and a knife. Now, that's no medical kit that was in his truck.
Right.
You know, it is absolutely terrifying to think of what his ultimate plan may have been. And if I had not gone to get management to have him removed, I had asked management to remove him. You know, I don't know if that foiled his ultimate plan. I guess I'll never really know.
Yeah. Let's take a step back, because you and your husband ran a karaoke business.
Yes.
And which, of course, exposed you to all sorts of characters and bars, and that's how this guy ended up stalking you. But talk a little bit about the business and the thing that led up to that moment.
So this occurred in Nashville, Tennessee. So I would run karaoke shows in downtown Nashville. Different venues had their own equipment. And sometimes the girls that would run karaoke shows would call and say, you know, I feel kind of sick. I don't really want to work. Or they they didn't feel like working, so I would go in and fill in for them. So I would work different shifts, and it turns out I would work a lot of shifts in downtown running shows at night. And my husband, Ben, would always come with me. And at the end of my shift, we would ride home together. This man showed up on the karaoke scene, and, at first we thought he was just a tourist because there's tons of tourists that come through there.
Yeah.
But then he started coming in more often, and we figured he must live here. And Ben took it upon himself to introduce him around the room to some of the regulars to try and make him feel welcome.
Yeah.
And he had sent me a social media request. Actually, one night he had given me $100 bill. When you're running karaoke shows, the way that you make money is through tips. Mm-hmm. So at various points throughout the night, I would walk around with my tip jar. And, people would give you $5 here, $1 there, maybe a $20 bill if they were really impatient and they wanted to sing next, You could move their name up the song list. But this man gave me a $100 bill. And at first I thought he had made a horrible mistake. Maybe he thought he had grabbed a 10 and he accidentally grabbed 100. So I remember taking it back to him and I showed it to him. And he just looked at it and looked at me with this look of accomplishment. And I knew it wasn't a mistake. So this sounds silly now, but at the time I thought, obviously he wants to sing a lot tonight. So I did just that. I got him up to sing a lot that night. Mm-hmm. And the next day, he had sent me a friend request, and I added him, just like I add the rest of my karaoke customers. It was the way that we retained our customer base.
Yeah.
And he started sending me messages. At first, they were normal, but then they started to progress in a different light. And he started to say things like, "You're attractive," blah, blah, blah. Of course, when you work in venues like this, especially in tourism, you get that. Right. Women get that all the time, and we're just gracious, say thank you, go about our job. Well, then it started to progress even more, and he started saying some inappropriate things about my husband, and I ended up having to delete him and block him. Mm-hmm. And then my husband had to ask him to leave me alone, and then he shows up like we hadn't seen him for a solid month. And he shows up at this restaurant where we've never seen him before. It's a good 30, 35-minute drive away from downtown Nashville where he normally went for karaoke. And I just remember thinking, he's stalking me. That's when I realized this man is stalking me. He's not a dedicated karaoke customer. He doesn't have just a simple crush. There is no reason for him to be here.
Yeah. So that history is why your husband pointed him out and tried to have him removed that night.
I tried to have him removed. Ben was just a happy-go-lucky, fun-loving guy. And I don't think Ben really sensed anything.
Yeah.
I don't think Ben really sensed that much. I mean, he knew that the guy was being inappropriate, but I think to Ben, he just thought, I'm just going to tell him to leave her alone, and he'll leave her alone. And when I saw him that night, I realized something is terribly wrong here. And I said, Ben, I'm going to ask that he be removed. And Ben looked up and he saw him. And he said, okay, babe, do whatever you need to do.
Were you, you were licensed to conceal carry at that point, and Ben as well. You were both trained gun owners?
No, Ben was not.
Okay.
I was. Ben
what was your decision to do that?
Was
it related to your work, or was it something you were raised doing?
No, I was raised around 18th century muskets. My dad was super into living history and reenacting the French and Indian War. And so my father would work on these muskets, like in his garage, and I would watch him shoot them, and he would, make his own lead balls, the ammo. And I found it fascinating, but my father never taught me about firearms. He taught my brother. I'm the one, my little sister and I had Barbie dolls, and I never really learned about guns until I was in probably my mid-20s. I met a United States Marine sniper, and he became a friend and took me out and started to kind of train me. But I didn't actually decide to get my handgun carry permit until a horrible crime occurred in Knoxville, Tennessee. Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom were both brutally tortured, raped, murdered. I don't want to go into the details of everything, but it was awful. And that one crime made me realize that it could happen to anyone at any time. In an area where you or I would feel safe, evil can come and find you anywhere.
Yeah.
And these two these two individuals had their whole lives ahead of them. They were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and evil found them. And that's what really made me decide, maybe I need to get my handgun carry permit. Maybe I need to carry something more than just pepper spray.
That's like that moment, and my wife and I had a same sort of revelation, if you will. I decided, I've always been sort of philosophically pro Second Amendment, but there was a recent event, not so recent anymore, but there was the mass shooting in Paris at the Bataclan Theater, and we go to a lot of concerts, and it struck a personal note with me because there's a scenario where I might have been at such an event, and I decided at that moment that our decision not to own guns, we're in the District of Columbia, it's a little bit more difficult, a lot more difficult here to get a permit, but we decided that it was personally irresponsible, almost like free riding on law enforcement and other people that had taken that responsibility. So it's not just a choice for me, and it sounds like for you, it's like I need to step up and be responsible.
Yes.
Is that a fair way to say it?
Absolutely. I don't want people to be paranoid, but I do want people to be prepared.
Yeah.
Because never in my life did I ever truly, really think that something this horrific could happen to Ben and I. This is something that happens on the news. This is something that happens to other people. Well, now I am one of those people sitting in front of you today telling this awful story, and it can happen to good people. Bad things happen to good people every single day. And I just want people to be prepared.
Yeah. And, people maybe naively hope and count on law enforcement to be there whenever something bad happens.
Right.
But there's a phrase that you use, which I'll butcher, but, the police are minutes away, but the shooter is there now.
Right. Yeah, and it's not law enforcement's fault. I mean, I am a huge supporter of law enforcement. I think they have a very difficult job, but even law enforcement knows that they can't be anywhere and everywhere at any time.
Yeah.
And most rank and file police officers will tell you that they support the Second Amendment and they support everyday law-abiding citizens having a gun to protect themselves and their loved ones because they know that they can't be there all the time.
Yeah.
And I don't know, if you want to talk about this, I know you know all about it because you're libertarian, but the police have no real constitutional duty to protect the individual. Never once has an individual won one of these cases that's gone before the Supreme Court. I think people think that law enforcement will always be there to protect them.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that law enforcement, they're good people and they want to protect people. But if for some reason they can't, there's no recourse. I mean,
well, there was that horrific example, the school shooting in Florida, where law enforcement didn't go in, and clearly, a complete dereliction of their responsibility. I don't even know what their legal responsibility was, but everybody in civil society would assume that it was their job to go in and protect those kids, and they didn't do it. And you're saying that there's no constitutional responsibility for them to do it.
According to the Supreme Court, there's not.
Yeah. Which is and you probably didn't know that at the time, but you made a personal decision to take responsibility. You were trained and licensed to carry, and yet because of presumably some well-meaning law, gun-free zones,
Right.
and particularly like guns and alcohol don't mix, and some well-meaning legislature and maybe some well-meaning anti or pro-gun control advocate came up with this idea that we should make bars gun-free zones. Is that what the law was?
The law was any restaurant, if they serve alcohol,
Yeah.
then it's a gun-free zone.
Yeah. And that created this horrific outcome.
Yes. I can't tell you 100%, that I would have been able to save Ben. Obviously, I can't tell you that.
Yeah.
But what I can tell you is I think it would have changed the odds. Susanna Hupp talks about this. She wrote the foreword for my book. She survived the Luby's Cafeteria Massacre in Killeen, Texas. Both of her parents were murdered in front of her, and she had to leave her gun locked in the car. And she and I have become friends, but she says the same thing. She can't tell you for certainty that she would have been able to stop the killer, but it sure would have changed the odds. I feel the same way that she does.
Yeah. And well, let's fast forward because we'll probably get into some of the research that your organization is doing right now. So this happens to you, and I can't imagine going through that. But one of the ways that you made sense of it was to become an advocate for self-defense, an advocate for the right of everyone to defend themselves, and particularly women.
Absolutely.
You at some point you put aside your Barbie dolls and got a gun.
Yes. I started to do my own research online just because I was curious what some of these women's, advocacy groups and feminist groups and stalking resource groups were advising women. If a woman's being stalked, what are they telling women? And so much of the advice out there is you might want to consider changing your name. You might want to consider moving, get a new career, get a restraining order. Tell your friends and family about the stalker and what they're doing. Keep, tight notes on everything. Basically, all of the advice, and it may be needed, but all of the advice is centered around the woman having to change her entire life or living like a hermit because of some creep who can't take no for an answer. And I believe that there's an additional information that's missing there that's also an option, and that is to learn the basic human right of self-defense, learn about the Second Amendment. You have the right to protect yourself and your loved ones. Get the proper training, consider buying a gun to protect yourself legally. Why is that an option that's seen as so taboo? This should be openly discussed with women, and then I believe women can make the decision for themselves what works best for them and their safety and the safety of their loved ones. But why leave this out?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's a religion, right? And it's an emotional religion. There just shouldn't be any guns. Like we shouldn't allow that. What do you say to that? Because our position is sort of rational and logical, and going back to whether or not you could have defended Ben and yourself in that particular situation. If you read some of these creepy manifestos of mass shooters, they almost always point out that they targeted a gun-free zone because they knew that they would be safe to do their evil deeds there. So the question of whether or not somebody is carrying is a disincentive for bad people to do bad things.
Right.
But that, of course, is a logical argument. I think demonstrated by empirical facts, but the emotion is, but there just shouldn't be any guns.
Well, the majority of these mass public shootings that we see in the media, the one thing the media fails to tell the public is the majority of these mass public shootings occur in gun-free zones where everyone there is absolutely helpless. They're defenseless. I mean, these guys are trying to get a high body bag count, right?
Right.
They're trying to do as much damage as possible. I believe they're trying to get attention. They want notoriety. They want to a lot of them want to die at the scene, and they don't care about consequences. What they care about is killing as many people and doing as much damage as possible. And if you create zones where everyone there is helpless, the bad guy can walk right in with any kind of tool to kill, you're really encouraging these types of attacks. I think gun-free zones encourage these types of attacks.
Yeah. It's almost an advertisement.
Yes.
So they did go back, and was it because of you Tennessee repealed that dumb law? And what's the status of the law in Tennessee today?
Well, I can't take credit for it. I can just say that I certainly tried to help.
Yeah.
But the law has changed in Tennessee now. Now, as long as you've got your handgun carry permit, and as long as you are not drinking any alcohol, you can now carry in establishments, in restaurants that serve alcohol. Now, they're still allowed to post a sign. Obviously, private property rights.
Right.
They can post a sign saying no guns allowed, and you're supposed to honor that. But at least it's no longer state law.
So, doing your research with feminist groups, you found this gap, basically teaching people how to defend themselves. Did you ever go to the feminist community? Have you spoken to these groups?
No.
Will they have you?
It's just a waste. I figure it's just a waste of my time.
Yeah.
It's just a waste of my time. They don't want to hear from somebody like me. No way. But I just find it ironic that they talk about empowering women. We need to empower women. Well, I think we need to empower women too.
Yeah.
But you know what? My empowerment is a little bit different than yours.
Yeah.
I think that women have the right to defend themselves how they see fit. And, I believe that gun rights are women's rights.
So your life changed on that day radically, and it'll never be the same. But one of the ways that you decided to redefine yourself is you packed up everything, no job, no money, came to D.C. looking to be an advocate. Why'd you make that decision? This is the belly of the beast.
Yes.
We don't always do the right thing here.
Yeah.
I don't want to shock you with that.
Well, I guess it was the opportunity to work with Congressman Thomas Massey was just amazing.
How did you guys meet?
I really, I went and interviewed with him. I just came to D.C. and interviewed with him, and I don't know. I guess he liked me. He hired me, but he's just an amazing person. He is solid on the Second Amendment. He is about as pro-gun as anyone can ever get.
He says that was his gateway to libertarian philosophy, and he makes fun of me for all the libertarian books that I've read, and he's like, I just want to own a gun. That's his argument, I think. But you became he hired you to be the executive director of the Second Amendment caucus.
Yes. Which
he founded in the House. He's probably not always popular with some of his colleagues when he talks about that stuff.
Yeah, he's great. He's a great boss. I was with him for it was about a year. It was about a solid year. And I would have stayed, but I don't like D.C.
Yeah.
The rent is too darn high. The traffic is horrible. I missed my family, so I moved back to Tennessee. I loved working for him, though. He was an incredible boss.
I thought you were going to tell me that our mutual friend, John Lott, who's right off stage here, poached you from Massey and convinced you to come over and work for the Crime Prevention Research
Center. Yeah.
Thank you.
No, actually, I just missed my family.
Yeah.
My mother was having some serious health problems, and I just said, Thomas, I love working for you, but I got to go back home.
Yeah. So what are you doing now?
Now I'm the executive director of the Crime Prevention Research Center. I make the trains run on time.
Yeah.
I do a little bit of everything. Bottle washer.
Can you make John Lott run on time? I'm not totally convinced.
Most of the time. He's pretty good most of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he's one of those intellectual types, and they can be a handful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's like a walking computer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so tell me, you probably know some of the data. We just made this claim that most most of these horrific crimes that we read about in the news are caused in gun-free zones. Tell me about some of the research.
I believe the stats right now, the last time we checked, was like 94%. 94% of these mass public shootings occur in gun-free zones.
Yeah.
So there's one thing I'd like to touch on, and that is, according to the CDC, 1 in 6 women in their lifetime have been stalked. With those kind of numbers, I don't think these women should be left defenseless. I mean, where do you think a deranged stalker is going to go to either harm or kill a woman or her loved ones, quite frankly? They're going to go where they know that she's helpless. So let's take, for instance, a woman that is working for a business where they completely ban firearms from the premises altogether. So she can't have a permitted firearm, with her inside the business. So she's vulnerable there at work. But she also can't have a legal firearm locked in her vehicle either. So now she's vulnerable at work and anywhere she travels to and from, grocery store, bank, gas station, wherever. Even when she pulls up into her own driveway. It's pretty scary that women can't protect themselves wherever they are. I think it makes them very vulnerable. And people assume bad guys are stupid. They're not stupid. They can be very brilliant in their evil plans.
Yeah. So other than Fox News, where is there a receptive? Because to me, that's common sense. But I'm sort of inclined to get the logic of self-defense. But a lot of women would have an emotional reaction against that argument. Is that fair?
Sure. So
what do you say to them?
I say, you need to go to crimeresearch.org and look at all of our data.
Yeah. Well,
then make a decision.
So I disagree, which is why you're on this show, because I think your personal story and other people's personal stories and making that sort of emotional appeal to your right to be safe, your right to defend yourself. I mean, that to me is hopefully more persuasive than data, because I'm an economist, so I'm totally guilty of being a data dork and trying to convince people about the laws of supply and demand. Mm-hmm. But I realized that recently, this was a revelation in a midlife crisis, where I realized that I was the weirdo, and that the way that I process information is not the way that human beings process information. So just telling these stories, and particularly, it could be terrorism, it could be stalkers, it could be some angry, confused kid that doesn't fully understand what they're about to do to themselves and others. Whatever it is, the top-down law enforcement absolutely cannot deal with a decentralized threat. And we see this more in the context of terrorism. The reason that terrorism is such a vexing problem to deal with is that we have all these top-down centralized institutions that are supposed to deal with it, and they're very decentralized. So to me, that's almost like a freedom-based argument for decentralizing personal defense, because you can't, if you're waiting for the cops, you're already dead.
Yeah, I can tell you that I've been told that the police arrived within 3 minutes of the 911 call that night, which is incredibly fast. Yeah. That is really, really fast. The police just happened to be literally right down the street at an apartment complex. And 3-minute response time almost never happens. But I can tell you that when it's happening to yourself or your loved one, it seems like an eternity. Yeah.
Where's law enforcement on gun rights? I haven't seen polling on this. I've heard that they are quite supportive, but I've also heard the opposite. Do you
There
know?
was a survey done by Police One, and we have that data on our website on crimeresearch.org. You have to look at, police chiefs. They did this survey, And the majority of them support gun rights. I mean, you can see it clearly in the questions that are asked. And do you think that it helps reduce crime? And law enforcement supports concealed carry of firearms for personal defense by law-abiding people.
Yeah. I mean, I get the logic of that because they probably know firsthand that they can't be there.
Sure, and they see really horrible things happen to really good people.
Yeah.
And they don't want to see these horrible things happen to really good people.
So how is tell me about the book. This just came out, and what's your plan? Obviously, you're doing this because you want people that are skeptics to at least consider this view that about self-defense.
Absolutely. I just want to educate people about the dangers of gun-free zones. And, what good is owning a gun if you're not allowed to have it with you? There are so many gun-free zones out there. I think people should be able to protect themselves. And quite frankly, when the bad guy is the only one with a gun, guess who wins? And that's what happens. And quite frankly, men don't even... I mean, look, I love men. There's lots of good men in the world. Lots of really, really wonderful men, and there are protectors. But there are some men in the world that are not good men. They're evil. And I really want to see more of the good men out there encouraging the females in their life that they love and care about, their moms, their sisters, their daughters, their wives, to consider protecting themselves, because a gun is a great equalizer. A man doesn't even have to have a gun to seriously harm or kill a female. I mean, it's just a fact. Women in general are physically not as strong as men. And a gun is an equalizer that puts her on equal footing with, a man that wants to harm her. And the point is, you're not a police officer. Your job is not to apprehend the bad guy. Mm-hmm. Your job as a woman is to keep that bad guy the hell away from you. And a gun is a wonderful way to do that.
So you obviously haven't met my wife, because she could snap my neck like a twig and has threatened to do so on multiple occasions. But let's talk about this in the context of, I set up this kind of, it's kind of a straw man, but it's also exactly where we are in Washington, D.C. today. There is almost every Democrat, not all of them, but almost every Democrat, and certainly on the far progressive side, there's this wish that there were no guns. Mm-hmm. And they keep putting more restrictions, and they keep proposing limits on where you can take guns, and
right.
And they're like, that gun you can't have because that's an assault weapon, which is not a technical definition. It's a scary word. But the other side, and I'll caricature them, the Republican conservative true blue thing is it almost sounds sometimes like they want everyone packing. Mm-hmm. And they want every teacher in every in every high school to have a gun. I don't think that's the answer either. Where do you come down on that?
I think that individuals can make the best decision for themselves. Obviously, I don't want to mandate that all teachers carry guns in schools. That's ridiculous. But look, if a teacher is a good law-abiding person and they want to go through the proper training, whatever training is deemed necessary by that district, for them to feel comfortable with that teacher carrying, I don't see why they can't carry. If it's their decision, they've gone through the proper training, they've passed the background check, they've worked with law enforcement works with teachers, and they've had the proper training, why not? Why not give them the ability to protect themselves and the students that they love and care about?
It's like, and I think the qualifier there is every person that is choosing to be a responsible, trained gun owner, and I'm imagining that a lot of teachers want nothing to do with a gun.
Sure, and that's their right.
Right.
Nobody wants to mandate you must carry a gun. No.
Yeah, you really don't want anybody that is freaked out by guns. I mean, even though you weren't raised to shoot gun and you're around muskets, you did grow up in a culture where guns were not considered a weird and abnormal thing.
Right.
And I think part of this is cultural, right? If you grew up with parents that owned guns responsibly and maybe they taught you how to handle a gun, it's no big thing. It's a normal thing.
Sure.
Whereas if you grew up in a city where guns are banned and your parents didn't know anything about them, it
can be scary.
It's a scary thing.
Sure.
So we got to somehow sort of sort through this so that people that are responsible have that ability, because that gets back to sort of the incentive for bad people to act or not act. Because we're not only talking about psychopaths, we're talking about people that are kind of cowardly in a lot of ways.
Yes.
So that's one thing that I feel like we struggle to sort of communicate what we mean by responsible gun ownership. But I remember, so when I worked on Capitol Hill, long before Thomas Massey was there, my boss was facing a vote on the assault weapons ban in 1993, I think it was. And I learned the hard way, because I had all of these philosophical arguments about the Second Amendment and why, in fact, it was there, and it wasn't for hunting, and it wasn't even for self-defense. It was for defense against
tyrannical government.
Which, by the way, I think is a totally unpersuasive argument unless you happen to be paying attention to what's happening in Hong Kong right now.
Right.
Chinese government has all the guns, and they are killing students in the streets. But I made all those arguments, and I could almost see my boss's eyes roll in the back of his head. He's like, I don't even understand or care about what you're saying.
Right.
So I got frustrated, and I said, okay, let's go shoot some guns, which I don't think he'd ever done before. And we shot rifles that were to be banned and rifles that were not to be banned.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember vividly him asking and we went to the FBI to do this, and he asked the guy, so what's the difference between that one and that one? We're banning that one. We're not banning that one.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, and I don't think he was trying to be a smartass, he's like, well, that one's painted black and it looks really scary. And that resonated with my boss, but it was almost a tactile thing. He had to hold it and see it and to understand what
Right.
it was. I don't know how we connect with people who would always be like too afraid to even go
to the range
and learn a little bit.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of hard to explain to people that never shoot a gun that, guess what, the inner mechanisms of these guns, this one you call an assault weapon, and this one's a hunting rifle that your grandpa and everybody else used, they're the same. They just look different on the outside. This one is black and scary looking, and they've made it look kind of cool and tactical, but the functionality is the same.
Yeah. Have you ever considered gun training for women as a project?
Have I ever considered being a firearms trainer myself?
Or just advocating for women that have thought about this but are just kind of intimidated because they've never shot a gun before?
Sure. I also work with a group of ladies from across the nation. We're called the DC Project. It's 50 women, one from each state around the nation. And we come to DC once a year and speak with Congress about the importance of our Second Amendment. And a lot of those ladies are qualified, firearms trainers. And I've seen that a lot of women like the idea of being trained by other women, because some of them, sometimes it can be intimidating learning from guys, especially guys that are ex-military or, they're out there on the range trying to train you, and it can be a little intimidating for some of the ladies. So, yeah, they like to learn from other females. It just makes it easier, and they feel more comfortable. So, yeah, I absolutely support women training other women.
So that's the homework assignment from this show, is that men and women who have thought about personal defense and thought about taking that step, they should explore that if it's something that they're comfortable doing, because I think we all have a responsibility. and if you're not interested or not capable, I definitely don't want you doing that. But if you are, now's like the time.
Yeah.
So, but before they do that, they need to buy a copy of your new book. Where do we get a copy of Stalked and Defenseless if we want to read your story?
It's available on Amazon and also Barnes & Noble online, and you can check out my website. It's stalkedanddefenseless.com.
Okay. And if we want to check out research produced by the Center for
Crime Prevention Research Center.
I butchered it again.
You can go to crimeresearch.org for all the information and facts you need.
Okay. I'll tell Thomas Massey that you're okay.
All right.
Thank you, Nikki.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thanks for watching Kibbe on Liberty. By now, you know this is the most important event of your week. So make sure you subscribe on YouTube. Click the little bell so you get notifications. Kibbe on Liberty, mostly honest conversations with mostly interesting people.